There is a moment in every shift that tells me more about a patient than almost anything written on their chart. It happens before I speak. It is how they get from the waiting room to the cubicle. Some people walk in easily, some shuffle. Some arrive in a chair because the distance from the front door has quietly become too far for them. I want to be careful because that is not always a choice, and it is very often nobody's fault at all. But over nearly 10 years of doing this job, I have watched the same pattern repeat until I could no longer pretend it was coincidence. The people still walking regularly as they age recover faster. They have fewer complications. They spend less time in hospital, and far more of them go home. The people who stopped walking years ago have a harder time with almost everything that happens to them, including things that have nothing to do with their legs. So I am going to say something that sounds like an exaggeration and then spend the rest of this explaining why it is not one. Walking is the most underrated health intervention that exists. Not the most powerful for every outcome, and never a replacement for medicine when medicine is genuinely needed. But for what it costs, for how little it demands, and for how many people it could help, nothing else really comes close. I understand why that lands badly. We live surrounded by expensive gyms, cold plunges, glucose monitors, supplement stacks, and morning routines with 9 steps before 7. The whole industry is built on the idea that the answer must be complicated and must be bought. So free advice feels like being fobbed off. It is not. The research on what daily walking does to the human body is remarkable, and it reaches much further than burning a handful of calories. It reaches your kidneys, your liver, your joints, in the opposite direction to what most people assume, your brain, in ways measurable decades later. I am an emergency medicine doctor. I have spent close to a decade meeting people at the very end of a process that began 20 or 30 years earlier. That is the honest truth of my job. Most of what I see is not bad luck. It is the final chapter of a long, quiet story. Nobody was reading that story while it was being written. That is exactly why I would rather talk about the first chapter, while the ending is still changeable. Now here is the part where I have to be straight with you, because otherwise this sounds like a lecture from somebody who has it all figured out. I am 33. Statistically, none of this should feel urgent for me yet, and for most of my 20s, it genuinely did not. I was on my feet 12 hours a shift and told myself that counted. Then I did almost nothing on my days off. Nothing at all. I would finish a run of nights, sleep badly, wake at 3 in the afternoon, eat something beige, and never once go outside. That was normal. Then, about a year ago, we got a golden Labrador called Mango, and everything changed without me deciding anything. He arrived as a ridiculous, uncoordinated little thing who would sit down halfway up the road in protest and refuse to move another step. What nobody warns you about a puppy is that his fitness improves considerably faster than yours does. The walks got longer. Then they got more frequent. Somewhere in there, without setting a goal or downloading an app or telling anyone I was starting something, I became a person who walks 3 times daily, morning, afternoon, and evening. Rain, darkness, night shifts, exhaustion, none of it matters. The dog has no interest whatsoever in my rota. I want to be clear that I did not do this deliberately, which is exactly why what happened over the following months surprised me so much. The first thing I noticed was my legs. We live somewhere aggressively hilly, and hills I used to dread simply stopped registering as difficult. My baseline fitness climbed without me ever once doing anything I would have described to another person as exercise. The second thing caught me off guard. I am a sugar person. I always have been, and I probably always will be. I am the doctor who lectures patients about processed food and then eats most of a biscuit packet at 4 in the morning. That craving did not disappear, but it flattened out considerably. It stopped ambushing me, which after 15 years of losing that fight felt strange. The third change is the one I still think about. My mood shifted, though not dramatically, and not in any single identifiable moment. I noticed it looking backwards. 4 months in, I realized the flat gray feeling I carried after difficult shifts was not appearing nearly as often. I had treated that as an unavoidable cost of the job. It turned out a decent portion of it was the cost of not moving. So when I tell you this evidence is compelling, I am also telling you it matches something I felt myself, accidentally, without trying. I am going to take you through 9 things that consistently appear in the research when people walk daily, ending with how long you actually live. Some you will have heard before. At least 2 I would bet almost nobody has ever explained properly. And the 6th reverses what most people believe. Then at the end I will give you the actual framework for doing it, because knowing walking is good has never once made anybody walk. Let us start with the area where the evidence is about as strong as lifestyle medicine ever gets, which is your heart. If I could keep only one piece of research on walking and burn the rest, it would be the cardiovascular data, without hesitation. A large meta-analysis in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology pooled data from hundreds of thousands of people and found significantly reduced cardiovascular death among walkers. But the important finding is not the headline number. It is the shape of the curve, which tells you something the headline cannot. It was a clean dose-response relationship. More steps meant lower risk consistently until the benefit began leveling off somewhere around 7,000 to 10,000 daily. That matters for 2 reasons. A dose-response pattern is one of the signs scientists look for when deciding whether something genuinely causes an effect. And the plateau means you do not need to be extraordinary. You need to be adequate repeatedly for a very long time. So what is physically happening inside you? The first answer is endothelial function, and this is worth understanding properly. Your endothelium is the single cell lining inside every blood vessel you have. It is not passive plumbing. It behaves like an active organ. It decides how much your vessels relax or tighten, how sticky the surface becomes, and how easily blood clots form inside them. When it is healthy, arteries widen on demand. When it is damaged by sugar, pressure, smoking, or years of sitting, it stiffens and inflames. That dysfunction is one of the earliest measurable steps toward a heart attack. It appears long before anything hurts or shows on any scan. Walking improves it. Rhythmic movement increases blood flow, and that flow drags across the vessel lining, signaling those cells to release more nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the molecule that tells arteries to relax. Do this consistently and stiffness falls. Resting pressure drops, cholesterol improves, and inflammation settles. Look at that list again. Arterial stiffness, blood pressure, lipids, inflammation, 4 independent risk factors, all addressed simultaneously by one unremarkable activity. Then there is the Nurses' Health Study, which followed over 72,000 women for 8 years and remains among the most quoted cardiovascular research ever. Women walking briskly for at least 3 hours weekly had roughly 35% lower risk of a major coronary event than sedentary women. 3 hours weekly is 25 minutes a day, for a third off your heart attack risk. That is the entire deal. If a company brought me a pill with that effect size and no side effects at all, it would be the biggest launch in history. Which brings me to the second benefit, and it deserves its own space because it is the quietest dangerous thing in all of medicine. I would estimate more than half the patients I put a cuff on have a systolic reading above 140. A good proportion of them have absolutely no idea. That is the entire problem with high blood pressure. There are no symptoms until there is a catastrophe. It does not hurt. It simply sits there year after year, hammering artery walls with a pressure they were never designed to tolerate. It thickens those walls, damages the lining, and quietly arranges the stroke or kidney failure that arrives 2 decades later, looking like bad luck. Work published in the Journal of Hypertension and elsewhere consistently finds walking programs reduce systolic pressure by roughly 3 to 4 points on average. I know exactly how that sounds. 3 points. Barely anything. That reaction is completely reasonable and completely wrong for an interesting reason. Population medicine works differently to intuition. A 3-point drop in average systolic pressure across a population is linked to large reductions in strokes. Small shifts in the average move enormous numbers of people away from the dangerous edges. Risk is not a switch. It is a slope. Individually, it matters even more if you are sitting borderline. For someone with early hypertension, that reduction is sometimes the difference between starting medication and not, or at the very least, delaying it by several years. I have had that conversation hundreds of times, and the people who listen return with different numbers. The third benefit is blood sugar, and this is where a 10-minute change in timing outperforms most people's entire gym membership. Here is the mechanism, because once you understand it properly, you will genuinely never forget it, and you will start using it tonight. Normally, when you eat carbohydrate, glucose enters your blood, your pancreas releases insulin, and insulin unlocks the door on your muscle cells. In insulin resistance, that key stops working properly. The lock is gummed up. Your pancreas shouts louder, and glucose lingers far longer than it should. That prolonged elevation is what does the damage, slowly, silently over many years, long before anybody gives you a diagnosis or a prescription. But there is a second door, and almost nobody is told about it. Your muscles can bypass insulin entirely when they contract. Muscle contraction itself moves glucose transporters to the cell surface. You do not need the key. The muscle opens the door from inside, which means a walk after eating does something a walk at any other time simply cannot do, no matter how long it lasts. Your legs become a glucose disposal system at exactly the moment there is glucose to dispose of. Timing turns ordinary walking into targeted medicine. Research in diabetes care tested this directly, comparing short walks after each meal against one longer walk elsewhere using identical total time. The post-meal walking produced better 24-hour glucose control. Same effort, same minutes, better outcome purely because of when it happened. This is not niche. A very large slice of adults sit somewhere on the insulin resistance spectrum, and most of them have no idea. Lower post-meal glucose means lower average insulin. Lower insulin means less fat storage signaling and considerably less long-term strain on your pancreas. Less time with high circulating sugar means less glycation, where sugar molecules bind to proteins in vessels and nerves and gradually wreck them. That process drives diabetic eye disease, kidney damage, and nerve pain. 10 minutes after dinner meaningfully slows it and costs you nothing whatsoever. The fourth benefit is your kidneys, which almost nobody discusses. Despite kidney disease being common, progressive and ending in dialysis 3 days weekly. A study following over 6,000 people with chronic kidney disease found regular walkers had significantly lower risk of progressing to kidney failure. That held even after adjusting for the other variables you would expect to matter. And the mechanism behind it is genuinely elegant. Your kidneys filter blood through roughly 1 million microscopic units called glomeruli. Each is a tiny tuft of capillaries acting as a sieve. Pressure drives that filtration, but too much pressure, sustained across years, physically damages the sieve. The membrane thickens, then scars permanently. Once a glomerulus scars, it does not come back. You are born with a finite supply, and you spend them slowly or quickly. 3 things damage them fastest: high pressure inside them, high blood sugar bathing them, and chronic low-grade inflammation running in the background constantly. Now look at what we have already covered. Walking lowers blood pressure, which lowers the filtration pressure inside those delicate little units. Walking improves insulin sensitivity and lowers blood sugar, which directly reduces glycation damage to those same fragile filtering membranes over time. And walking reduces systemic inflammation, which is an independent driver of kidney disease progression regardless of what else is happening. I will be honest about the limitation. The kidney benefit is mostly indirect. Walking is not reaching inside and doing something magical. It is removing 3 of the main things wearing your kidneys out. Indirect does not mean weak, and this has been demonstrated repeatedly. You may have noticed insulin sensitivity appearing 3 sections running. Hold on to that, because it returns again immediately, and again after that. By the end, you will see these are not 9 separate benefits. They are one underlying change expressed across 9 different organs, which brings us neatly to the 5th, your liver. Fatty liver disease affects perhaps 1/4 to 1/3 of adults in developed countries. The overwhelming majority of people who have it will live their entire lives without ever finding out, because it announces nothing at all. It begins when fat accumulates inside liver cells. There are no symptoms at that stage. The liver is an extraordinarily uncomplaining organ. It absorbs an enormous amount of abuse before saying anything. But in some people, that fat eventually triggers inflammation, and inflammation triggers scarring. Scarring across enough years becomes cirrhosis, which is irreversible, and which is the point where the liver simply stops doing its job. I have seen the far end of that process many times. I do not recommend arriving there. The good news is genuinely better than expected. A systematic review in the Journal of Hepatology examined exercise interventions in fatty liver, including plain moderate walking, nothing more elaborate. It found exercise significantly reduced liver fat even without significant weight loss. I want to sit on that, because it is quietly liberating. Standard advice for fatty liver is simply to lose weight. Reasonable, but demoralizing, because weight loss is slow and people fail repeatedly. They then conclude nothing works and stop entirely. This tells you the movement itself changes how your liver handles fat, independent of scales. Three things drive it. Walking increases the rate your liver burns fatty acids rather than storing them away for later. It reduces the flood of free fatty acids released from fat tissue and delivered into the liver in the first place. And it improves insulin sensitivity, there it is again, which reduces the signaling telling your liver to manufacture fresh fat from scratch. So your liver can be measurably improving while your weight has not moved at all. The scales are a poor judge here. The sixth benefit is joints, and almost everything most people believe about this is precisely backwards, which is why it surprises everyone. The standard assumption is that walking wears joints out, that knees have fixed mileage like tires, and every step spends some of it. So when knees start aching, people rest them. They walk less, avoid stairs, and carefully protect the joint from any further load. That is very often the exact thing making it worse. Here is why, and it is a genuinely lovely piece of anatomy. Cartilage, the smooth cushioning surface lining your joints, has no blood supply of its own. None whatsoever. It cannot be fed conventionally. Its only route to nutrients is absorbing and releasing the fluid inside the joint capsule. That fluid circulates only when the joint moves. Cartilage is essentially a sponge that has to be squeezed in order to eat. Stop squeezing it and it starves quietly. So a joint that stops moving is not being protected. It becomes stiffer, less nourished, and considerably more likely to break down. This is not theoretical. The Osteoarthritis Initiative followed thousands of people with knee arthritis or at risk of developing it, tracking them for years. Regular walkers reported less pain and lost less function over time than those who did not walk. Some analyses found less cartilage loss too. There is a second mechanism on top. Walking strengthens the muscles surrounding your joints, particularly your quadriceps, glutes, and hip stabilizers. Those muscles act as shock absorbers. Every unit of force they absorb is force not traveling through the joint surface itself. Weak quadriceps mean your knee takes the full load of every single step. Strong ones mean it takes considerably less. So the conclusion is uncomfortable but clear. Excluding acute injury or an actively inflamed joint, aching knees usually need gentle, frequent movement, not parking. Seventh is muscle. And this is where I think the most underappreciated cause of decline in older people actually lives. It is called sarcopenia, the gradual silent loss of muscle mass and strength that begins in your 30s and accelerates from 50 onwards. You can lose a substantial fraction of your muscle across adulthood without noticing, because it happens at perhaps 1% a year. Nothing about 1% is noticeable, until suddenly it is. Until you cannot rise from a low chair without pushing off the arms, until you cannot carry shopping upstairs in one trip, until you catch your toe on a curb and your legs cannot save you. I have admitted many people with fractured hips. For a frail older person, that fracture is frequently not simply a bad afternoon. It is the event that ends independent living entirely. The outcomes in the year following a hip fracture are genuinely sobering reading. Now let me be completely honest, because I do not want to oversell walking and lose your trust on everything else. Walking is not resistance training. If you want to actively build muscle, you must load it against meaningful resistance. Walking cannot replace that. Please lift something heavy twice a week if you possibly can. That is a separate conversation with its own separate evidence base. But for preserving what you already have, maintaining coordination and slowing age-related decline, regular walking makes a substantial measurable difference. Work in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found people with higher daily step counts retained significantly more lean muscle across multi-year follow-up. Part of that is metabolic. Better insulin sensitivity supports muscle maintenance because insulin resistance actively accelerates the breakdown of muscle protein. But part is neurological, and this is badly underrated. Balance and coordination are skills, and skills decay when they are not practiced. Walking uneven ground, stepping curbs, changing direction, adjusting to slopes, each rehearses reflexes that will one day be all that prevents a fall. You are not only maintaining muscle, you are maintaining the wiring that operates it, which is arguably the more important half. Eighth is your brain. And this is the one that got me personally, so I will let the evidence speak rather than overstating. The research linking walking to mental health is remarkably consistent across populations, age groups, and study designs, which is unusual in this field. Reduced depressive symptoms, reduced anxiety, improved mood, lower perceived stress. Reviews in the British Journal of Sports Medicine show meaningful reductions in depression scores. Importantly, benefit appears at modest doses. This is not marathon territory. The largest jump comes from moving from nothing to something small. Some of the mechanism is chemical and quick. Walking triggers endorphin release and raises endocannabinoids, your body's own natural mood-lifting compounds. It also lowers cortisol, your main stress hormone. Chronically raised cortisol does not merely feel unpleasant. It damages sleep, appetite, and immunity. But the slower mechanism matters more. Walking increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps existing neurons survive and supports new connections growing between them, particularly in the hippocampus, the region governing memory formation. That region is among the first damaged in Alzheimer's disease. Higher levels are linked to better memory, sharper thinking, and lower dementia risk. This appears in long-term data too. The Framingham Heart Study found more physically active people had significantly lower dementia rates across decades of follow-up. Think about what that actually means. What you do on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at 45 is quietly negotiating with who you become at 75. As I said earlier, the mood effect is the one I felt myself. It sounds like a cliche until you have lived it. Go for a walk and you will feel better. Obvious advice, right up until 6 months in, when your baseline has quietly shifted. You realize the mood you accepted as simply how you are was partly just how you were living. That distinction matters enormously. Which brings us to the 9th, and it is really just everything above added together and allowed to accumulate over decades. Better heart function, lower pressure, better glucose control, protected kidneys, less liver fat, healthier joints, preserved muscle, a better supplied brain. You cannot improve 8 major systems simultaneously without affecting how long the whole thing runs. The arithmetic here is not complicated. A study in JAMA Internal Medicine followed thousands of older women using measured step counts rather than self-reported activity, which matters enormously. People are famously unreliable at estimating their own movement. Measured properly, women taking around 4,500 steps had substantially lower mortality, lower than those taking roughly 2,500. All-cause mortality, not one specific disease, death from anything at all. And here is the finding that should change how this feels. The benefit leveled off around 7,500 steps daily. Beyond that, additional steps bought little further survival in that group. 7,500. Not 15,000. Not even 10. That 10,000 figure, incidentally, began as a marketing slogan for a Japanese pedometer in the 1960s. It was never a scientific target. 7,500 steps is roughly an hour spread across an entire day. That is achievable for most people, currently doing far less. And the steepest part of the benefit curve sits at the bottom, going from 2,000 to 4,000 beats, going from 8 to 10, which means if you currently do almost nothing, you are standing at the most valuable point on the entire graph. Nobody has more to gain. So here is how you actually do it, because everything above is useless on its own, and I mean that sincerely. I have explained these mechanisms to hundreds of patients who nodded, agreed completely, and then changed absolutely nothing. Understanding is not a system. First, find out where you actually are, not where you think you are, because people routinely overestimate their activity by thousands of steps. There is a strong chance your phone has been counting steps in your pocket for years already. Go and check last week's daily average. If you have no data at all, a basic step counter costs very little. Whatever number appears, do not judge it harshly. It is not a verdict. It is a starting line, and starting lines are supposed to be behind you rather than ahead. Second, set your target from that number rather than from some ideal. If you are under 3,000 daily, your goal is deliberately tiny. One walk of 10 to 15 minutes once a day for the next fortnight. That is genuinely the whole instruction, nothing more. This feels insultingly small, and that is precisely the point. Adherence is predicted by whether the first version was easy enough to never fail. Third, after 2 weeks, add a second walk and place it after a meal. By now, the first should feel entirely unremarkable. That unremarkable feeling is the signal it has become routine rather than a project. Put the new one after your largest meal. 10 minutes is enough to meaningfully change your glucose response, and this is where the highest leverage benefit in this entire conversation quietly hides. Fourth, build gradually toward roughly 7,000 to 8,000 steps daily, adjusting for your size, age, terrain, and current health honestly. It is a direction, not a pass mark. Missing it slightly while walking consistently beats hitting it twice and then stopping entirely. Fifth, get the pace right, because intensity matters more than distance here. Brisk enough that talking is comfortable, but singing would be awkward. Slightly out of puff, still conversational. That intensity is where most cardiovascular and metabolic benefit sits, which is why slow ambling counts less. Sixth, and this decides whether any of it works, engineer your life so that consistency becomes the default rather than a daily decision. One brilliant walk changes nothing. 6 weeks of ordinary ones begins changing measurable things inside your body. So remove the decisions entirely. Same time daily, so it is not a choice. Same route, so nothing needs planning. Shoes by the door, ready and waiting. If you are waiting to feel motivated, you will manage 9 days and stop. That is what almost everyone does, including me previously. Build it so it happens on days you do not want to, because those are precisely the days that determine your average. And if you want the version that removes the decision entirely, the one I stumbled into completely by accident, get a dog. Mango knows nothing about endothelial function. He has no opinion on filtration pressure, brain fertilizer, or mortality curves. He knows something simpler. He knows that at 7 in the morning, again at 1, and again in the evening, we go outside together, non-negotiably. He has been right every single time. Getting him is among the best things we have ever done for our health, entirely unintentionally. You do not need a Labrador. You need something that makes going outside feel less like a decision and more like weather. Start today. Start absurdly small. Let the boring version accumulate quietly without announcing it to anyone for the next 6 weeks. Your arteries, kidneys, liver, knees, and the person you will be in 30 years will all be quietly, permanently grateful you did.